Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. A special thank you to the audience for joining us wherever you might be, whether that's your home or your office or a home office that might be a couch. We're delighted that you are sharing some of your time with us for this important conversation. And a special thank you to our presenting partners and today's panelists. My name's Dan Sharp, Vice President of Community Research and Grants Management at the Columbus Foundation. And we're excited about this year's Giving USA virtual presentation. For the last 60 years, Giving USA has been the go-to resource that compiles all of the data into an easy to read and digest resource for our field. And this year, we're going to be looking back at 2019 and all of the activity in the field and our region, as well as discussing the economic landscape of early 2020. And that certainly the world has changed, and whether that's organizations pivoting their missions to respond to a global pandemic, or the all-important awakening for some people to realize the need to be absolutely anti-racist, and for others, the absolute acknowledgement and affirmation of the importance of their life's work, and now a momentum of everybody to join them in that important fight. And so the conversation today and just the work of the sector reminds me of the root of the word of philanthropy, the love of mankind, and that we all have a role to play, and we'll see that in the details of the data today. So whether you're a donor or a practitioner, thank you for joining us today for this conversation. But also thank you for fulfilling your role and duty for the love of mankind through philanthropy. So a couple quick housekeeping notes. All registrants and attendees are muted, and your videos are not visible to the panelists and the presenters. We will have a dedicated question and answer time this morning, so please feel free throughout the presentation to utilize the question and answer Q&A box at the bottom toolbar to pre-populate your questions. And certainly also feel free to enter those questions during the question and answer session that we will have and have specifically set aside in the full agenda. Additionally, there will be resources made available within a day after the webinar, and you will receive an email link to the Dropbox folder with those resources. So if you've not yet formally registered for this webinar, and you are able to participate without registering, but if you've not yet submitted an email RSVP through Eventbrite, please ensure that you do so that we can have your contact information to share that follow-up information with you. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and we have intentions to share excerpts of it and access to its entirety through social media. So folks that were unable to join us today can still have the benefit of the insight and the expertise from today's panelists. So now it's my pleasure to turn the microphone and presentation over to a seasoned and successful fundraising executive and a Giving Institute board member who resides in our community. That's Michelle Kramer of Kramer and Associates, to introduce our next speaker. Michelle?
Thank you very much, Dan, and welcome everyone. Time, talent, treasure, and testimony. Yes, I did say testimony. And it's because of the special lens and heart Dr. Una Osili has within her. It was just last year in an article in Time magazine where Dr. Osili said the trifecta of how giving in traditionally framed as gifts of time, talent, and treasure is getting a fourth leg, and that leg is testimony. Dr. Osili strongly believes your voice and sharing your story across multi-social media channels can have a profound impact on getting the word out around a cause or getting people mobilized around an issue. This is yet another example of Dr. Osili's belief that all of us can be philanthropists by using our voice. Dr. Osili is an internationally recognized expert on economic development and philanthropy, speaking across the globe on issues related to national and international trends, funding and economics. She's the Associate Dean for Research and International Programs at Indiana University, Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, where she has researched and taught for over 20 years. Her passion for philanthropy came from her parents, who taught her at an early age the importance of getting involved and learning how you can make a difference. And boy, has she made a difference. Dr. Osili has testified at the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on the Role of Philanthropy and Remittance in Foreign Aid. She has an economics degree from Harvard as well as Northwestern. To the rest of the world, she's Dr. Osili, the leading expert on house behavior and economic policy. But to us in Central Ohio, she's just Una, that brilliant, eloquent, and compassionate soul who helps all of us make sense of this incredible array of data and giving it meaning to our communities as well as our organizations. This morning, she's going to provide insights and perspective when we are all eager to understand how to deal with the current landscape. It is my pleasure to introduce the most inspiring leader, philanthropist, and my dear friend, Dr. Osili.
Welcome. Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you. And Michelle, thank you so much for that generous introduction. I am humbled, honored to join you all this morning and appreciate everyone's time and contributions to make this day possible. I especially feel obligated today to tell you how much I have enjoyed visiting with all of you in person in Columbus every year. And this year, although we can't be together in person, I hope to bring you the warmth, the generosity, and the excitement we have about this year's report through this virtual meeting. This is, all of us are adjusting to these uncertain times. There's a great level of, the word uncertainty comes to mind, but I think in all of our uncertainty, we have also seen tremendous generosity. All of us have seen that in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in the organizations we work for. And today I'm going to share with you once again information from Giving USA. We know that the world has changed since 2019, but I'm here to share with you that one thing that hasn't changed is that Giving USA is launching 2020 June, and that we're going to take you through the data, one sector at a time, and talk about what this data means for you. To do now is once again thank you all for being with us, but also invite you to join us on this virtual tour data. It's going to be, I think, encouraging and inspiring to see what's been happening in the sector and what this means for all of us going into 2020. So now I'd like to just start screen sharing, and we have the ability, although not to be present with you physically, but to be able to share the data and make this as impactful as possible. So let me start sharing my screen right away. Every year, our team has absolute pleasure and honor of sharing the Giving USA data. This data, as you've heard, is the most comprehensive report available anywhere in the world on philanthropy. And as we've already heard, in times of uncertainty, this data can provide guidance, it can provide unique insight, and it can also provide hope and inspiration. By looking at the past, we've also learned that philanthropy has played a vital role as an anchor, as a source of support, and a source of resilience in times of turmoil and turbulence, whether it's the great pandemic in 1918-19, or the tumultuous period of the 1960s. We saw philanthropists, foundations, corporations, and also individuals really step up. And so this year, I'd like to share this data, but also as much as possible, share what this means for our current context. So what is Giving USA? This is a true collaboration. We work very closely with Giving Institute members. You've heard from Michelle Kramer, also Laura McDonald, and many other leaders in your community work hand in hand with the Lilly Family School to produce Giving USA every year. So this is a chance to acknowledge our partnership and also thank all of you for your contributions. So let's start with the big picture. You are among the first anywhere in the world to receive these results and to hear firsthand what happened in the year 2019. Not many audiences around the world have seen this data in its rich detail, and I will work very hard to unpack and peel the layers and help us really see what this data means. So let's start with the high-level findings. Giving reached nearly $450 billion. This is one of the best years we have on record. There's some changes in the data this year. Individuals account for 69%, but still the largest slice of the pie. And foundations, largest ever slice of the pie at 17% of overall giving. So key takeaway, Giving reached a new level of $450 billion, marking one of the highest years on record. And I also want to emphasize that this is a historic year for many reasons. This is Giving USA's 65th year, and it's also our first year of virtually launching the data in a pandemic. So there are many reasons to actually celebrate both this new level of giving, but also the environments in which we're sharing it. Giving USA provides a great deal of context. You might say, how did we reach this new level? For historical context, we've seen that when there is a strong economy, giving also performs quite strongly. In 2019, the economy was remarkably strong. The stock market grew by about 0.9% year-over-year increase in the S&P, and GDP grew by 4.1%. So if you take all this information together, it's not surprising that we did see this new level of growth. On the next slide, Giving USA does not just tell us how much is raised every year, how much is given in charitable giving, but it also tells us where all that giving goes. Much has changed in the world since Giving USA started its publications in 1955. And what we've seen, perhaps the biggest shift of all, is the share of American philanthropy that goes to religious congregations. Today, it's 29%. It's still by far the largest share. But when we look at this data in the 1960s, 2/3 of all American philanthropy went to congregations. So as you look at this data, please take a moment just to emphasize or to identify which subsector you belong to, where your work resides. Some work across many sectors. Education is by far the second largest recipient of American philanthropy at 14%, but you'll note that two subsectors, the environment and international, relatively small still, have grown significantly in the last decade or so. And in fact, 3% of American philanthropy now goes to the environment and 6% goes to international. So that is the big picture that I'd like to share. And then what I'd like to do next is turn our attention to the top 10 findings. Every year, our team works very hard to take all of the data, sift through, and identify what really are the top findings. And so this takes a lot of discipline. We have to actually hold ourselves back because there is so much data to present. And so here, I'd like to turn our attention to the next top 10 findings. So first, giving reached, as we said, a new record of $450 billion. In terms of growth rates, giving grew at about 4%. And adjusted for inflation, 2.4%. So really on par with what we've seen in other periods. Now, how does this compare? Just as a way of thinking about this, I brought out data from the 1970s. So that was about 50 years ago. And what we were able to find is that individual giving back in the 70s accounted for over 80% of giving, about 85% roughly throughout the 70s. And today, as you can see, giving now accounts for 69%. So we've seen segment go down, but foundations have increased their footprint in American philanthropy from about 5.6% in the 1970s to 17% today. Another place where we've seen some important shifts is that bequests, which were about 6-7% in the 1970s, 50 years ago, decades ago, are now at about 10%. What has stayed relatively constant is the corporate segment. Corporations accounted for about 5% of giving in the 1970s and still account for about 5% today. So what does this data all mean? It means that individuals are still the bedrock of American philanthropy, and our work today is more important than ever before, given the complexity, the strength, and also the resilience of philanthropy in both good and turbulent times. The second finding that is important to have everyone take a look at is that we did see broad-based growth. 3 out of the 4 sources of giving increased, and actually only one segment stayed flat, and that was giving by bequests. In particular, I just want to highlight that corporate giving had a strong year, growing at about 13.4%. Individual giving, which is the largest share by far, grew at 4.7%, roughly 3% adjusted for inflation. Foundations also had a strong year, growing at 2.5%. So taking all this data together, we had a very solid across the board with some highlights, especially corporate giving and individual giving. I'm just going to mention that giving was strong in 2019, but over the past 2 years, we've also seen some strength, especially when we look at foundation giving and corporate giving taken together, and also charitable bequests. So these are important baseline numbers as we go into a period of great uncertainty and, as we've already acknowledged, turbulence. The other number 3 finding, and this is probably the one that I think all of us have to keep in mind as we think about what this data means for our current landscape. Giving is influenced by social and economic conditions. In the 1990s, as you can see, giving grew. There was almost a really strong period, strong environment for philanthropy throughout the 1990s. One phrase that I often use is that when you look at one recession, you've seen one recession, because each recession has affected giving differently. And some recessions have not actually led to a decline in giving. The Great Recession, which is for many of us still very relatable, giving actually declined by about 14%. And it took 6 to 7 years for giving to recover. By 2017, we had reached kind of a new high for giving. And as we look at the current environment, it's the economy, it's the economy, it's the economy. It's also the social environment. So we'll return to those themes as we go through the findings. As an economist, one thing I stress often is that when we look at the economic landscape, we can emphasize what's going on with GDP, employment, income, but we should also pay close attention to the stock market. Over time, we've seen the stock market play a really important role in the overall trends in charitable giving. As you can see here, when the stock market improves, this has a really important impact on giving. Giving does tend to be a lagging indicator, which means that the economy has to improve first before people are more financially secure in general. Americans give when they do feel secure, and uncertainty does tend to have a dampening effect on giving. So as we look into the future, the stock market is going to be a key indicator to watch for philanthropy, especially when we think about large gifts. The next finding is one that we have covered and talked about quite a bit, especially in the Columbus context. One way to measure our progress as a sector, we've heard that philanthropy is the love of humankind, is the vital role that giving plays, not just in our social and economic lives, but in almost every aspect of our lives, we're seeing philanthropy play a role. When we measure its impact, we see over time that philanthropy accounts for about 2% of the entire GDP. That might be one way to measure it. We've also seen the philanthropic sector actually employs about 10% of all the labor force, which is another way to measure the strength of the sector. And one question that often comes up is, what would we have to do differently to boost the role that philanthropy is playing? Is there a role for public policy, tax incentives, or is there something that nonprofits can do to inspire more donors to give? And that's what gets us to one of the next themes, the power of individuals in philanthropy. Through American history, we've seen donors at all income levels participate in giving. One concern that we have as we look at the data year over year is the fraction of Americans who are participating in the philanthropic sector has actually declined. In the roughly the beginning of the 21st century, 2/3 of American households gave. And our big phrase was that more Americans give than almost any other civic activity. When we compare giving rates to voting rates, and we are in an election year, we see that more Americans give than vote. However, over time, and certainly accelerated by the Great Recession, we've seen giving rates start to decline. Today, that giving rate stands at 53%. That data comes from the Philanthropy Panel study. And the concerning element of this data is that those giving rates are declining for younger Americans and also for individuals with lower and moderate incomes. So one challenge for all of us as we think about the next century, the next decade of philanthropy, is how do we boost giving for younger Americans, involve younger Americans in charitable giving. Giving, we know, is a habit, and when individuals start giving, they tend to continue that habit throughout their lives. We also know that although the participation rates in giving have fallen over time, the average giving amount has actually stayed relatively constant or even increased. We call this trend donors down, dollars up, or holding steady. So overall, philanthropy has continued to grow, but there have been distributional shifts. And one of our goals for sharing this data is to encourage all of us to think about how we can continue to support younger people participating and giving continuing to be broad-based and drawing on all of the segments of our society. In addition, we know that philanthropy is in fact very diverse. Americans of all different backgrounds participate. And one of the myths of philanthropy often that we try to debunk is philanthropy is not exclusive to any one income group, ethnic group, or racial group. And in fact, is something that unites Americans of all different religious backgrounds, ethnic and racial backgrounds, or even immigrant traditions. When we look over time, individual giving has also been one of those areas that actually corresponds very closely to the economy. In fact, individual giving has shown more responsiveness to economic conditions over time. The 1990s, and I asked this question this week, were the 1990s so good for philanthropy, especially giving by individuals? Economic prosperity in the 1990s helped boost philanthropy. Another period in history in the 1950s where economic prosperity was very broad-based, we saw giving also increase. And so throughout American recent economic history and also in the past, periods of economic boom have actually been very strong for philanthropy. The most recent period, you could also say, has been a period of economic growth, but it has not been as broad-based as all of us have now heard. And we've seen philanthropy grow, but we've also seen distributional shifts taking place. One way that we have also measured how successful philanthropy is over time in actually bringing people together is not just looking at overall giving as a share of GDP, but looking at what fraction of American household income or even expenditure is allocated to philanthropy. And here we see that it's also been at about 2%. It did go up in the 1990s once again, And this also gets us to the question, what could we do to boost this rate? Certainly public policy has a role, but economic and financial, as well as social conditions, can play an important role. Next, the sixth top finding is that foundations and bequests contributed a far larger share than ever before. This is really important as we go into this period of the pandemic and beyond. What we've noted, however, is that although individual giving, its segment in overall philanthropy appears to be lower than it has been in the past, when we take the individual segment and then half of the foundation segment and add in charitable bequests, we have something like 88% of all giving can be attributed to individuals. So individuals are still the largest segment, and underneath this individual segment is the notion of personal relationships. People give where they have a confidence and trust in the nonprofit, and where they have an engagement with the cause that's being supported by that nonprofit. As we look at the foundation segment, I think it's worth noting that not all foundations have had the same trends. When we look across the three types of foundations covered in this year's report, we'll note that community foundations actually increased by the largest at 5.6%. Some of that may be due to the underlying trends in donor advised funds, which is something that we may come back to if we have time in the question and answer period. Giving by independent foundations increased by 2.2%, and giving by operating foundations had the smallest increase at 1.3%. Number 7, corporate giving, as you saw, had the highest rate this year's report, increasing in double-digit growth rates, over 12%. And what we've also seen during this period is corporations playing a much more visible role in speaking out against injustice, in getting involved in social issues, and playing anchor roles in their communities. In fact, when we look back at history, we're seeing unprecedented involvement of corporations in whether it's the pandemic globally, or even addressing local and economic justice related issues. Over time, corporate giving has grown. However, as share of giving, this has stayed at about 5%. What explains the corporate giving? Primarily the economy, and especially when you look at corporate profits during this period, corporations have seen a strong increase in a healthy growth in corporate profits over the last few years, and this has had an impact on corporate giving. However, corporations are also changing how they engage with the communities they serve. They are building more cause marketing partnerships and marketing relationships with nonprofits, as well as sponsorship dollars. Increasingly, more corporations are investing in workplace giving campaigns, as well as larger employment-related engagement. So not just dollars for doers programs, but also programs where firms support their employees' volunteering efforts. So corporate giving, you might say, we may be underrepresenting in the way that we count it, which really focuses on direct grants, either the corporation gives or through its charitable foundation. Corporate giving as a percentage of corporate pre-tax profits is another way to measure how U.S. companies are engaging in philanthropy. And one trend that we saw over time is that this has actually fallen. Certainly, since the Great Recession, we saw a smaller share of corporate pre-tax profits being invested in philanthropy. However, there seems to be an uptick in this year's report, as you've noted. And we've also seen with the pandemic and many other recent trends, corporations stepping up perhaps in unprecedented ways to support causes, whether that's healthcare, food insecurity, gender equity, and more recently, social and racial justice related causes. Number 8, to turn our attention to the subsectors. Most people, when they USA data, always ask the question, well, it's great to see this aggregate data. What does this mean for my organization or my subsector? So here we have a drill down into each subsector and spend some time thinking about what these trends mean for individual organizations and nonprofits of all different sizes. So we should also note that every nonprofit is going to have specific circumstances based on location, donor base, and many other factors. But what we've seen in the last few years is very strong growth for arts and culture organizations, educational institutions, the environment, and public society benefit organizations. Public society benefit, for those of you who are not as familiar with the Giving USA data, refer to organizations that serve an umbrella set of causes. So this includes the National Donor Advised Funds, Fidelity, Vanguard, and Schwab, but also extends community-based organizations, umbrella organizations such as United Way, United Jewish Appeals, and also increasingly organizations that serve civil liberty causes and so forth are housed within the public society benefit segment. As we look at the subsectors that have not grown as strongly, you may note that religion did not have a very strong, you could say stayed relatively flat in terms of growth. And one explanation for the religious segment, something we can come back to, although religion still remains top recipient of charitable gifts, over time we have seen that fewer Americans are attending services, fewer Americans are affiliating with religious, particular religious or religious organization, and that more giving or more Americans are supporting charities that are essentially faith-based, but may not be congregations. So there are some important shifts that are taking place. However, it's important to note that Americans are still very committed to religious congregations, with about 30% of all gifts going to religious congregations. The ninth finding, and we're going to just spend a little bit of time just noting that public society benefit, arts and culture, education, and the environment have been some of the top performers, actually showing double-digit growth year over year's report. It's also worth emphasizing that arts, education in particular, and perhaps healthcare are organizations that do benefit from a strong economy. The environment stands out in its growth. In particular, this subsector has seen an abundance of interest, a spike in interest, a lot of this driven by younger donors and shifting public policy concerns. Millennials have been at the forefront of bringing attention to climate change and many other environmental causes. And there is increased awareness about this subsector. I should also note that the environmental sector has been also quite adept at using social media, a point that we raised earlier in terms of testimony, and social media campaigns to drive awareness and ultimately contribution. The only subsector that we saw actually decline in 2019 was international affairs. And this is after several years of extremely strong growth, where over 5 years we've seen very positive trends for international affairs. Those of you who work in the international arena might ask, what happened? Why did this subsector not see the same broad-based growth that we saw elsewhere? I think the main explanation here is over the last year or two, Americans have had a number of domestic disasters. So starting with Hurricane Harvey in 2017, Maria and Irma 2018, the Las Vegas shootings, California wildfires. We've had a number of domestic events and disasters that have occupied the attention of many Americans. This has also led perhaps to less attention to some of the international crises. So this is something that I think a trend we want to continue to watch, because at the global pandemic, it is something that cuts across national borders, and virtually every country in the world is affected in some way. The last finding allows us to look into the future a little bit. We've seen our world change remarkably over the last few months. Many of us had no idea going into 2020 that we were about to witness the types of shocks and inflection points that we've experienced, from working from home to conducting meetings via Zoom, to many other changes, both small and large, that all of us have had to make. For many organizations, one of the biggest changes is how to engage donors using a virtual means. This change has been coming for a while, with online giving growing rapidly, and also more donors using their mobile devices to engage with the causes they care about. We're seeing social media, the testimony component, play a larger and larger role in fundraising. And so let's assess that progress now and see where we stand and what this means for all of us going into the future. So just to give you the high level number, we've tracked this over time. Online giving accounts for about 9% of total fundraising. These numbers come from the Blackbaud Charitable Report. And what we've seen is online giving growing at double-digit rates. When we look over time, we also see that online giving has the ability to continue to play an even larger role in charitable giving. So let's take stock of everything we've seen so far, and I just want to share some points about the future of philanthropy and giving. So let's start by acknowledging that none of us have a crystal ball, and we do not know necessarily what the future holds. We have had to be both humble as well as courageous during these times. I think it's worth noting that Giving USA does give us an anchor from the data standpoint. We've seen in the past that philanthropy has played a vital role in both the recovery and rebuilding of many communities around the world, and that charitable giving continues to be influenced by both social and economic conditions. So fundraisers have the ability to respond as well as to be proactive in the current environment. One of the points that we say repeatedly is this is a very important moment for philanthropy. Donors, we have tremendous need in communities around the country and around the world. And in the past, we've seen that donors respond to needs. So making the case for your organization and connecting with donors is going to be more important than ever. In the last disasters that we've studied, so Hurricane Harvey, Maria, Irma, we saw that 30% of Americans gave to those crises. The average contribution was about $300, and most donors gave to this on top of their regular charitable giving, so they did not cut back on their giving. And the most important reason that donors cited for their giving is the size and the extent of the need. So making the case for support is more important than ever. Relationships matter, and so continuing to connect with donors, even with the challenges of working virtually and remotely. And then finally, and this is probably the most important, many of us have had to pivot, and as we look into the future, technology is going to play an even more important role in navigating the current and future landscape. I just want to end by saying that one thing that has given our team inspiration and encouragement during times is to look back and see that no matter what crises Americans have faced, nonprofits and philanthropy have played a vital role in the response and the recovery. And so our mission is more urgent and more important than ever before. So I want to encourage all of you to continue the great work that you're doing. And also special thanks to the Columbus Foundation and to all our partners for hosting us today. I look forward to the question and answer period.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Marcy Williams, and I am the Executive Director of OANO, which is the Ohio Association of Nonprofit Organizations. It's my pleasure to be introducing two of today's panelists. First, we have Christy Angel, President and CEO of YWCA Columbus. Christy serves as the Chief Executive Officer of YWCA Columbus, one of the community's most respected social justice organizations dedicated to eliminating racism and empowering women. Prior to joining YWCA Columbus, Christy was Principal of Government Relations and Public Affairs for Calfee Strategic Solutions. She provided counsel and advisory services to businesses and nonprofit organizations on local government, business strategies, and community relations matters. Previously, Christy was Deputy Chief of Staff and External Affairs and Services Director to former Columbus Mayor Michael B. Coleman. She led the mayor's External Affairs Office, served as the city's Chief Government Relations Officer, and was responsible for developing and retaining relationships with business and community partners. She also spent the early years of her career working for Columbus City Council and in the nonprofit sector on housing and homeless issues. We also have Bruce Harkey, President and CEO of Franklin Park Conservatory. Bruce joined Franklin Park Conservatory and Botanical Gardens in 2007, where he led the successful implementation of 10 new world-class facilities and botanical gardens, and also led a $45 million campaign in the public and private sector. Prior to the conservatory, Harkey spent 4 years with Honda Motor Company in Tokyo, Japan, in an international management training program, and 14 years in management positions with Honda of America Manufacturing in Marysville, Ohio. Harkey serves on the board of Experience Columbus. He is the former president of the Columbus Cultural Leadership Consortium and is a former board member of the Contemporary American Theater Company, Columbus Association for the Performing Arts, Clintonville Beachwald Resources Center, and the Asian Festival.
Hello, I'm Deborah Aubert-Thomas, President and CEO of Philanthropy Ohio, and I'm here to welcome our other panelists and also our moderator. Sue Zazan, President of the Central Ohio Region for Huntington Bank. Sue leads the diverse team of financial services professionals at Columbus-based Huntington Bank, a 33-year banking veteran. Sue joined Huntington in 2016, where she led the organization's consistent growth across Greater Columbus for more than a decade. Active in the community, Sue is a member of the Board of Trustees for the Columbus Area Chamber of Commerce, the Center for Family Safety and Healing, Ohio Bankers League, One Columbus, Rev One Ventures, and the Wexner Center Foundation. Next, let's welcome Brad and Stephanie Infante, co-founders of the Lindy Infante Foundation. In 2005, Brad founded his own orthopedic medical distribution company, CDC Medical, which employs more than 80 people today. In addition, Lindy's legacy lives on through his son's work as co-founder of the Lindy Infante Foundation. In 2017, after being a stay-at-home mom for more than 18 years, Stephanie established the foundation. And in just 2 short years, she's formed partnerships with several Columbus area organizations, including KIP Columbus, Columbus Recreation and Parks, Boys and Girls Club of Columbus, Life Sports at the Ohio State University, Cristo Rey Columbus High School, and Girls on the Run. In addition to running the foundation and caring for her family, Stephanie serves on the board for Dublin, Ohio Health and the Boys and Girls Club of Columbus. And finally, our moderator, Laura McDonald, principal and founder of Benefactor Group. She's a frequent speaker at local, regional, and national conferences, and she's addressed hundreds of nonprofit boards. She's also vice chair of the Giving USA Foundation. Welcome to you all.
Great, and thank you, Deborah and Marcy, for those introductions. We'd like to spend a few minutes unpacking some of this data for our local context, and then we're going to move on to addressing some of the questions that we've heard from the audience. I know that we've got a rich tapestry of questions that we'll want to get to in a few minutes. But before we do, I wanted to ask our panelists, Christy, I think you've been at a center of a storm lately. Thank you for the great work you're doing for our community. We saw that giving to human services grew in 2019. Has that been reflective of your experience, and in particular, your experience more recently?
Yes, Laura, thank you for the question. That has been reflective of our experience, and let me just give you a snapshot of the last few years. So our funding, our giving and philanthropy was up, about 5% in 2016 to 2017, and then we took a dip. We went down to about a 3% increase from 2017 to 2018, and if many will recall, and maybe you don't know, but that is when we went through a leadership change. So I think that dip was reflective of a leadership change that occurred about mid-year in 2017. And I was named to the position at the end of 2017. Between 2018 and 2019, we rebounded and saw a 7% increase in philanthropy, including about a 3% increase in gifts from individuals overall. Now this year we are trending to see very large increases, largely because first the COVID-19, the pandemic, and the basic needs that we provide, and obviously shelter to those who are unsheltered. And so the donations came in to support that work. But more recently, with the social justice and racial justice work, the advocacy that we are doing in the community, we have seen increased donations, but with that comes an additional responsibility to steward those donors and to assist those donors as they look to move social justice, into their agencies or their own philanthropy and in their own lives.
Thank you. Thanks, Christy. And it's interesting, all giving is contextual. And so some of the context that you described, whether it's a leadership transition or being at the front lines of causes that are important to people, really helps to illustrate that point. Stephanie and Brad, it's nice to have you here with us this morning. You also heard Una talk about the fact that giving by individuals increased by 4.7%, that individuals are really the drivers of philanthropy in America today. In your experience, what are some of the things that motivate individuals to make gifts?
I would say that giving, especially major gift giving, is deeply personal. When we give personally, we do so from our hearts. As you heard, we started the Lindy Infante Foundation in 2017 because Brad's father, Lindy, was one of the kids. And when we're serving these kids in Central Ohio, I see Lindy in these children.
That's wonderful. That's very poignant. What about you? When you're thinking about making a gift, how do you like to be approached, and what are some of the ways in which you decide what causes you'll support and how much the gift might be?
Personally, for me, I like to see my donations in action. I'm more willing to give more if I can see the impact that it's having. Over the years, the more impact that we see from our donations, the more it inclines me to want to give more to those foundations and those organizations.
Wonderful. Thank you. Sue, I know that there are many factors that also influence the level of giving and the causes that you support at Huntington, and I've certainly seen you also devoting your own personal time and resources to a number of organizations around the community. You saw that corporate giving grew significantly, but you also saw that it seems to kind of be stuck at about 1% of corporate pre-tax profits. Can you talk to me about some of the dynamics that you're seeing in corporate giving and that are affecting the magnitude and the focus of giving at Huntington?
Yes, I guess first I would like to talk about how we give. We actually give regionally. So we all fall under our corporate umbrella. Affordable housing, social causes and so forth are very, very important to us. But at the regional level, we're determining where the dollars go, which I think is really important. You see many larger organizations go more to a national or a level that feels potentially less impactful when you're in a community. We have dollars in our smallest communities that we give, and we know what's going on in each one of our organizations and communities in order to be very impactful. So I think that's a really important point. The other thing I would say is there's a lot more asks for things other than money, and we're very aware of those, like board leadership. We are now trying to figure out virtual volunteerism and how to really impact folks. Life Care Alliance, Meals on Wheels is a great example where we are still trying to be impactful. It's one of our largest outreach efforts, and we're still going to have drivers and so forth. So we're really trying to rally all our employees. As far as the 1% being from corporations, I think that will change over time as, Huntington has an ESG report, which is an environmental, social, and governance report, where the board and shareholders are now fully aware of how much we give, how we give, where those dollars go. And as that becomes more transparent, I think companies and shareholders will demand change. And at Huntington, certainly it's in our core values. So it's just a part of who we are. And I don't think that's consistent across the board, but I think it's becoming more consistent as shareholders and board members are demanding it.
Great, thanks. That's interesting that shareholders, because I think for a long time, corporations felt our first responsibility is to put the money back in the shareholders' pockets. But I think you're right that shareholders are now seeing that we all have a role to play in supporting civil society.
Yes.
Great. Bruce, Franklin Park Conservatory. Technically, you're in the arts and culture sector when we look at the recipients of charitable giving. And we've seen that that sector has had some years of very strong growth. But we also saw that it was a sector that was affected in the Great Recession, that it saw some declines in charitable giving. What is the case that you're making to your donors to continue to sustain the conservatory at this time?
Yeah, I think the timing for the conservatory has been very good. So coming out of the Great Recession in 2008 was the kickoff of our 2 master plan capital campaigns. And as was mentioned earlier, we raised about $45 million from the public and the private sector. And what we recognized was the need for there to be a real focus on experiences for families and children. In addition to arts and culture, the conservatory is very connected with the environment and education. So our experience has been consistent with that growth. We, in addition to the capital campaign dollars, we were able to maintain our individual funding or contributions over that same 10-year period of time. And the way we were able to do that, I think, is reconnecting with our donors in a very real way, listening to them. One particular example is the design charrettes and the engagement we did with the donor community for the Scott's Miracle Grove Foundation Children's Garden. We listened to the donors, we asked for their input, and I think they were motivated to continue supporting the conservatory because, as was said earlier, they saw their dollars being put to work.
Good, that's great. And I think that donor engagement is so important. I do have a question. Christy, maybe we'll start with you, but invite everybody to weigh in. You talked about the donors that have stepped up to support the important work that you are doing right now, whether it's in providing shelter to some people who might be vulnerable at this moment, or addressing this moment of awakening or racial reckoning in our society. But we know that only about 20% of first-time donors make a second gift to that organization. If we could hold on to just a few more of those, the lifetime value of those donors could amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars. What are you doing, and perhaps Bruce, you have some insights here as well from the conservatory, what are you doing to try to engage and build a relationship with those first-time donors?
Well, the first thing that new this year, actually, that we are planning, we will be doing kind of an onboarding session for all new donors. So a way to welcome donors to YWCA Columbus, to our work, introduce some of our leadership team. We also have a number of trainings and other initiatives that we're going to be rolling out around the social justice and racial equity work. And then we want to provide some town halls and some other opportunities, whether we are engaging with the staff of our donors. And this really is for all donors, not just new donors, but suite of services that we can provide to support this work especially virtually, primarily with our donors, so that they can have access to the information that we have, but also we can give them tools as they become more socially responsible and are looking to engage more deeply on these social justice issues.
Wonderful. Bruce?
I think, in the case of the conservatory, we've had a lot of new initiatives that are really focused on elevating the conservatory's mission. So it's all about quality of life and connecting the community through educational, cultural, and social experiences, but also recognizing that we need to play an important role in bridging the gap. There's a significant gap between those who are doing well and those who are not doing well. So when we opened the Children's Garden and some of our new experiences, we we started more access programs. And one of the programs that I'm really very proud of is the field trip scholarship program. So only 5% of our visitors to the conservatory for school groups are from Columbus City schools. So talk about the opportunity to engage new donors. That's been really powerful because an entire class and their teacher and the chaperones can come to the conservatory for this very important experience. We want people to connect with nature, and stewarding those relationships through those really compelling programs, I think, has been very important for us.
Great. I think we just heard two of the best practices. First of all, nurturing that relationship, as Christy spoke about, and secondly, demonstrating the impact of the gift. And as Brad mentioned, and Bruce, that's a great example of how you're doing that. I wonder, Stephanie and Brad, you heard Una say that the percentage of American households that participate in charitable giving has declined. Now, we do know that if we broaden our lens a little bit and we look out over a longer period of time, let's say 8 years, that a higher proportion, more than 85% of American households gave at some point in that 8 years. But on a year-to-year basis, it's only 53%. What can we do as a sector to increase the participation in charitable giving?
I think for that, it's finding out what some of your donors are interested in. Like I said earlier, we're very interested in seeing the impact locally. A lot of times I'm also amazed at the fact when we do make donations to certain organizations that a lot of times I don't ever hear from the organization again. I don't, not that I need to have a card, but I like to, at least after I make a donation, have somebody reach out to find out what interests me, whether I just want to be involved financially or whether I want to be involved in seeing the impact or personally getting involved. But I think the personal involvement is the important part, finding from your donors how they can personally get involved. Because for Steph and I, in the past, we would make donations to different organizations, but we weren't personally involved. And as we got personally involved with different organizations and saw the impact personally, most of the times we would go home and try to figure out ways that we could get more involved and financially give more to those organizations.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. In a moment, I'm going to ask my colleague Jeff Redfield, who is currently the president of the Association of Fundraising Professionals chapter here in Central Ohio. He's been monitoring the question and answer box, and in a moment, I'm going to ask him to join us, as well as Una to come back in so that we can answer some of those questions that have been asked. But while those arrangements are taking place, Sue, I thought that we could turn to you again as a hometown corporation that is very active and is very generous. We saw that through past crises like 9/11 or even the Great Recession that giving has been resilient. Did dip during the Great Recession, but it didn't in previous recessions. Do you think that corporations in particular are going to refocus their giving in any way or change their giving habits as a result of this particular moment that we're living through?
So I think there will be all different kinds of philanthropy and giving. A good example from Huntington's perspective is we helped 50% of the nonprofits in Central Ohio with the PPP loans, and using what we're good at, expertise, financial solutions, to make sure we're there for all of our partners is really, really important, along with cybersecurity and fraud, things like that. So I think you'll see a difference in how people help. I know in the Great Recession, we made sure we lived up to every single commitment we made in our communities, and we did not miss one. And even when it got really, really tough, this year, as the world has changed, we have dedicated dollars very specifically in all our communities. They were regionally focused. In Columbus, they went to the Columbus Foundation, Central Ohio United Way, and GCAC to help determine, we view them as the experts, all of you, to say where does the money most going to be needed. And so we had millions that went out to each of our communities to do that. So I do think it will change. I think needs will change from our nonprofit partners. I don't expect our dollars to change. I think they will change in where they're going because needs will be different. And the landscape's going to change. And we just have to be aware and connected so we can be most impactful. And again, I go back to, unless you know your region, not making decisions at the national level really matters at this point, because every single community is different. And I think that's really important to have all those relationships.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And yes, I saw in action some of the nonprofits in our community that benefited from your guidance through the PPP, that journey that was complicated for some of us. So thanks for all your help there. Una, as you come back and join us, Jeff, I wonder if there is an initial question. I think that I've seen a lot of questions about donor advised funds. That's a frequent area of inquiry. So what are some of the questions we've gotten so far from the audience?
Well, not surprised, fundraisers learn to ask questions, so we have lots of questions in the Q&A.
Excellent, good.
The first one I'll pose from several people wanting to know how the industry can do a better job at cultivating Black and brown potential donors, and what can the industry do to increase diversity in the profession, including racial bias?
That's an excellent question. I'm so pleased to see that question, because that's actually something that the Lilly Family School can help with. A few years ago, the school launched a new institute called the Mays Institute on Diverse Philanthropy. We have training for fundraisers of all different backgrounds on working with diverse donors. We also have scholarships that allow students who are from diverse backgrounds to enter the profession. And we, in addition to that, have included in many of our research projects an emphasis on diverse donors. So one example is our high net worth study. For the past 2 or 3 cycles, we have had an oversample of diverse donors. So you can learn about African American donors, Latino donors, Asian American, LGBTQ, and also younger donors of diverse backgrounds. So even just, I would say last year, our Women Give 2019 focused on how diverse women give. So if you're looking for research on diversity in philanthropy, the Lilly Family School has a host of resources. And the last point I'll mention is one that I think is very pertinent right now. A few years ago, we partnered with BoardSource on how to build a more diverse board. And so that report is available. It also has case studies and a toolkit on how organizations who want to increase their diversity, both on their board, but maybe in their leadership roles, how they can embark on that journey. And I would be happy to share those links with the team that's organizing this at the Columbus Foundation, so that all of you have access to that information.
That's great. That's great, Una. And I know that we've also seen some other industry-wide initiatives to bring more people who are underrepresented in our profession into the profession as well. So I know our friends up north at the University of Michigan have a particularly strong developmental program for philanthropic interns. Jeff, what else have we heard?
If we can take that question a little bit to local for our other panelists, ideas or best practices or thoughts on engaging our diverse donors locally.
Sorry, I get off mute. Well, you know, to build off of what Una said, you know, first of all, you think about how you fundraise, you know, and you think about a diverse staff, a diverse board, because, you know, your board typically is active in helping you identify donors and fundraisers. It also is expanding, you know, you as a leader of an organization and leaders of your staff, expanding your networks. So, you know, you're approaching, you know, donors, diverse donors, you have to meet them where they are. You should expand your network to be inclusive of those donors. You know, African Americans in particular, there's a statistic out there, I don't remember it exactly, but they are among some of the most philanthropic individuals, you know, in our country. And so, you know, meeting donors, I always say meeting donors where they are and getting to know what interests them, as Brad and Stephanie even mentioned, you know, is very important. And so in some ways, it's an approach that you would take with other donors. You would take some of those same approaches with these donors.
Sue, is the diversity of the board or the staff or the program participants one of the filters that you look at, or perhaps Brad and Stephanie, as you decide what organizations to support?
Yeah, for us, I mean, absolutely. We're definitely with the communities that we serve, looking for, you know, for diverse boards, people that are involved that are very diverse, because I just, you know, personally, I think you have to have a very good understanding of the community that you're serving. You know, if you don't understand the community that you're serving and the people that you're serving, it's hard to, you know, get other donors involved or to get people involved.
So one of the things we do at Huntington is we have business resource groups, and I'll give you an example. We have African American business resource group. We have an LGBTQ business resource group, a military and veterans resource group. And what we do is we combine that with our philanthropic giving, and we consult with them. So they're viewing it through a lens of their community, and they give us advisement and thoughts on what organizations are really impactful for our colleagues that serve that community. And I think in that way we bring that together so that our colleagues feel listened to as Huntington gives, but also the communities that we serve feel listened to. So I think that synergy is really, really important. And every single one of our regions may have chapters, and they all can do it locally and talk to their colleagues that serve, you know, those communities. And hopefully then we're doing a better job with being good stewards of our financial resources.
Great. Jeff, what are some other topics that people have added to the Q&A queue?
Yeah, there's a couple questions about the younger population and younger generation. Part of it is giving in non-traditional ways. So is it counted and is it tracked in the data and other giving platforms? And are there challenges in tracking younger generation donor habits because of these social platforms, social media, and other, you know, more online giving vehicles?
Luna, maybe briefly, what does the data tell us?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. We have seen overall that younger donors are less likely to give in traditional ways. And even when we adjust for income and wealth and life cycle, we see them giving less than their parents or even their grandparents at the same point in the life cycle. So even with all those adjustments, that's led us to ask a number of questions. Specifically, are nonprofits engaging these younger donors in the ways that perhaps most appeal to them? And secondly, are these younger donors giving in different ways beyond the traditional? One way that we've seen younger donors participate increasingly is the impact investing. So many younger donors want to, say, support a social business. They're also more likely to contribute on crowdfunding platforms such as GoFundMe, which may include a gift to a nonprofit, but maybe a gift directly to an individual or to a social business. So having said that, younger donors are redefining philanthropy to include both what we've counted as gifts to traditional charitable organizations, but also to a broader range of social impact causes and organizations. So I think that raises a number of questions for all of us. Number one, how do we engage these younger donors? I think the phrase I heard was meet them where they are. I think that's a very important. And secondly, learn to engage them in the ways that matter to them. One big lesson for us certainly is that you may need to redefine what engagement looks like, provide more opportunities perhaps to volunteer. Younger donors typically say they want to be involved in the sausage making. They don't want to just write a check. So finding ways for them to volunteer, and sometimes that may be a virtual volunteering experience, but thinking about all those ways that younger donors can contribute. It may be time, it may be talent, but it may also be testimony. This fourth T that we're adding, posting on social media, sharing stories about the organization and its work, and helping you amplify your message and your voice on social media. So I think it's really an opportunity here for us to redefine and re-engage in different ways.
Christy, I know that Una covered a lot there, but I wonder if, given that young is part of your name, the name of your organization, is that consistent with what your experience has been?
It is very consistent. We have seen an increase in engagement among younger donors from volunteering, serving on committees, to coming to our events, because we made some changes in, not only the work that we're doing and our outreach to them, but our social media work, our social media platforms, and we have younger members on our board. So our board, the diversity of our board, we are an all-female board. However, age diversity is also equally important to us. And so those younger donors or younger board members are attracting younger donors.
Wonderful.
Laura, can I just add something real quick?
Please do, Sue.
So I just want to give an applicable example with Christy and the YWCA. So our business resource group, which is the women's business resource group at Huntington, is very involved at the YWCA. And so because of that, they volunteer there. We do Financial Fridays, we do different things. And therefore, when we're looking at philanthropic giving, we are much more educated. We have colleague support because they have engaged with our women's BRG. That's our acronym for Business Resource Group. And because that is happening, it is going to be much more in our just visibility when we go to make philanthropic decisions. So again, for all the organizations out there to understand at large corporations, if there's affinity groups or groups within the organization that you could partner with that create that visibility versus just the philanthropy director, that makes a big difference.
And if I could, thank you, Sue, for mentioning that. And if I could add one additional thing, from the corporate side, our banker from Huntington is a young professional. Melissa, we have a young professional banker, an up and coming star at Huntington. And so that also, that relationship and those that she invites, whether it be her personal friends or the BRG group, that also, instills more engagement of young people into our work.
That's great. Great example of sort of living out the mission. Stephanie, you reaching forward to say something as well? You're on mute. There you go.
No, I agree. We personally, with our own board, we are in the process of forming a YPO board to engage our younger community that wants to get involved and help volunteer. Even just this summer alone, we had to pivot quickly with the foundation, and we started this sports in a bag distribution we've been doing all over the city. And, that's a great opportunity to bring some of my younger community on board to come and help distribute the bags and, be a part of it and, increase their awareness and also want to give.
That's great. I think engaging them in that way is one of the ways that they will learn about these behaviors that become part of their long-term lifestyle. So Jeff, why don't we turn to another topic? I know that we have a lot of questions about donor advised funds. What are some of the things that people want to know?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions about the data and where it falls in tracking. Does the donor advised fund increase in trend versus when it didn't happen before the 70s? Where does that fall? Does it fall under individuals? Does it fall under foundations? Is it a variety of locations in the data? And then any other, you mentioned it a little bit briefly, but any other thoughts on the donor advised fund aspect?
Good. I'll jump in, and Una, correct me if I am fast and loose with the facts. And then I'd really be curious to know, Bruce and Christy, how much donor advised fund activity you're seeing. But let's take it in two parts. Sources, first of all, what's the source of the gift going into the donor advised fund? That's almost always individuals. I will say there are probably some corporations, companies as well. Our own company has a donor advised fund that we do our matching gifts through. But the source would be whoever sets up the donor advised fund. And then it goes into one of two places, and this is why it gets a little bit confusing. Donor advised funds that are at some of the national DAF holders like Fidelity, Schwab, National Philanthropic Trust, those are counted, as Una said earlier, in public society benefit. In addition to that, gifts that flow into donor advised funds at a community foundation are counted in the community foundation bucket, the foundation bucket. And so it gets split into two places. It does make it a little bit confusing for people sometimes. And I do know that that's an area where we've seen enormous growth. We've also seen a lot of activity from donor advised funds in this particular moment. Perhaps some of you have seen the movement hashtag #HalfMyDAF, where there are some individuals who are advocating for DAF holders to liquidate half of the assets in their donor advised fund and deploy them out into the nonprofit community at this time. Just guess I'd be curious, Christy, Bruce, are you seeing increased receipts of donor advised funds? Bruce?
Yeah, sorry. You think we'd figured the mute button out after 3 months, but apparently not. I think in the case of the conservatory, we've seen a lot of support from family foundations through the Columbus Foundation. I know with the recent Big Give, a significant portion of the support the conservatory received, and thank you, Columbus Foundation, for doing that wonderful program, especially during this period of time, has been from family foundations. And to your point, we did receive a very generous gift last year from an individual who liquidated one of her foundations and split the money between 3 different organizations, and we were the fortunate recipient. And I think that reinforces the point about the donor stewardship and making sure you stay connected with those individuals.
Wonderful. Christy, have you been seeing more receipts from donor advised funds at the YWCA?
We have. We started to notice an increase last year from donor advised funds. And of course, like Bruce, with the Big Give this year, we have seen an increase in gifts from family foundations and funds from the foundation, Columbus Foundation. So thank you to the Columbus Foundation for the support and all of the hard work that goes into putting together the Big Give. But we're still calculating. But we do know this year we are definitely seeing an increase.
Wonderful. Brad and Stephanie, as I mentioned, we've seen that a number of individual donors are shifting to using these vehicles like donor advised funds, like family foundations. Why do you think that's attractive to individual donors?
I think it's attractive for us because with some of those, you have a little bit more control as to where the money is going and how the money can be utilized. And as I said earlier, what's important to us is obviously, seeing the impact. We've got 2 funds. One is for the Lindy and Ponte Foundation that we support athletics and sports with. And then we also have a personal one where we can donate to other organizations, that are outside of that realm, whether it's the YMCA or the Boys and Girls Club or different things like that. But the control, I think, is the big thing.
Great. Una, is there anything else in the data that would provide context to folks, or have we pretty much covered it?
I think you've covered most of it. The only quick point I'll add is that some recent data from 2 school alums show that giving during the Great Recession, DAF holders actually increased their giving. So that's a place that we've seen growth from in past downturns. And so a good place to look for continued support and growth during this period as well.
Thank you. Jeff, I know we only have a couple of minutes left, so how about a little bit of a flash round, if we will? Why don't you direct the questions, a couple of questions that we have left, to one of the panelists, and they'll try to give a quick answer.
Great. Dr. Una, you mentioned the nonprofit playing a key role in economic recovery, and that was one of the questions. Specific information or aspects of that to share?
Just 2 quick points. In the 1918-19 pandemic, we did see organizations like the American Red Cross, the American Lung Association, really supporting the health sector. And this was paramount to many communities recovering. During the Great Recession, we saw many community foundations play anchor roles in development efforts, all kinds of initiatives that were really catalysts for recovery. And you could look at Detroit as an example. Even I'm sure Columbus has a number of cases. And so community foundations are really an anchor during these kinds of turbulent times. And those are just a few examples that I would mention.
Sue, folks are asking for predictions on corporate giving. Did you bring your crystal ball this morning?
um, I see it continuing. I think it's going to be different. And I think we have to look at the best ways to serve our communities. And I think corporations are going to look to their expertise, just like we did with PPP. But I don't see it declining at all. I think it becomes more of a priority as we revitalize our communities. But we're all figuring out a new normal, right? And so that includes the financial sector. So I think it'll be different, but it will be strong.
Thank you for that. Bruce, Christy, any thoughts on where you expect your charitable receipts to be by the time we tally up the year-end results?
I think, because we were closed for 3 months, that obviously is going to have a significant impact on fundraising as well as our earned revenue. We've been able to increase our earned revenue up to about 71%, which in good years is helpful for financial sustainability to ensure that we can continue expanding all of our outreach programs and mission-based programs. But when you're closed for 3 months, that has a significant impact. We unfortunately did not qualify for PPP because we are structured as a joint recreation district, so we had to use the term pivot and figure out some additional solutions to balance our budget. One of the biggest impacts in philanthropy, though, is in the area of fundraisers. We have several large fundraisers. One is going virtual, one is still being discussed, but that is a big challenge for nonprofit organizations and will have a negative impact on fundraising this year.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough, Bruce. Christy?
I would agree with Bruce around the fundraisers and the events. And, we've had to pivot our events, turn them into virtual events. But I will say, because of the generosity of the community, we've been able to raise a good portion of the revenue for our largest event, which is the Women of Achievement event. But beyond that, for YWCAs, and this really is impacting us across the state. There are 14 YWCAs in the state of Ohio. Of course, there are more than 300 nationally, but nevertheless, because of the work around social justice and racial equity, this is giving us an opportunity to really invest in the part of our mission, the elimination of racism like never before. And so we are taking responsibility and want to be held accountable for the work that needs to be done there and be good partners in this community. And so we are seeing increases across all of the YWCAs, and at least in Ohio, because I speak with them biweekly. We are seeing increases in contributions to that effort, and now we are looking at being responsible in how we steward those gifts and also provide the resources, the programming, and the advocacy for change in those areas.
Thank you. I think that's a great way to wrap up this conversation that we've been having. I'd like to thank our audience for sharing so many great questions with us. I'd like to particularly thank Una, Dr. Osili, for joining us from Indianapolis this morning, and your poise and your wisdom and your recall of the data is just remarkable and has been a gift to us this morning. And Jeff, thanks for shepherding us through all of this, and especially our panelists. I really appreciate your willingness to talk about your own personal experiences as donors, as fundraisers. Clearly, I believe strongly in the Giving USA data and the value that it can bring to our organizations. I'd like to introduce Kimberly Horton with the Hodge Group, who's going to share with everybody a little bit more about how we can access some of these resources and even do so at a significant discount. Kim.
Oh, yes, thank you. My name is Kim Horton. I am Vice President at the Hodge Group. Just reference this slide, please. Go to this website. This has been such an amazing, robust conversation, and any of these materials will help enhance it. They will also help enhance your day-to-day practice. So we really encourage you to go to the website, look at the resources that are available, and take a deeper dive. This is something I always want to have at my fingertips, and we really encourage you to do the same. Any of these discount codes will give you a substantial 30% discount. So we hope that you'll take advantage of that. Thank you so much.
Danielle, are you going to now wrap us up?
Apologize. I'm also getting used to the mute button as well. Thank you very much for attending this today. This was an information-packed session, and we all acknowledge that we weren't able to get to all of the questions today. But if you have registered through the Eventbrite, you will be receiving an email that is a Dropbox link to various resources compiled by our partners and panelists today. So if you haven't registered yet through our Eventbrite, please go ahead and do that so you don't miss out on everything that you will need. Oh, apparently my camera was off also. Anything that you will need. So please feel free to go ahead and register. It's not too late. Thank you so much for attending today, and have a great end of the week.